Well, good morning, everybody. I got to say, you guys sound fantastic this morning. The worship has been uplifting to me, and I'm just blown away by what this church does, not just here in this space, but what we've done together throughout the week. I'm really proud to be a member here. I'm proud to be a servant of this church family. I'm blown away by your generosity, by your kindness, when you reach out in the community, when you work, when we work together. I really am just, it's humbling to me as somebody who is charged with delivering a word to you this morning. There was a kindergarten teacher who was walking around, and she was looking at the different she was looking at her students. She had told them to draw something, and she saw this one girl who was really working hard. She was diligent. She was very, very into her assignment. And she walks up to her and she asks, "What are you drawing?" And she says, "Well, I'm drawing God." And the teacher said, but nobody knows what God looks like. And without stopping her drawing and without missing a beat, the little girl replied, "Well, they will soon." Guys, no one has ever seen God, and no one knows what God looks like. But as we've lived life together, as the body of Christ, as the manifold witness of God on earth, I can say that because of the kindness of your hearts, I can look out and I see what God looks like. And so I'm very grateful that you've joined us this morning as we seek to learn what God has in store for us. As we always have done, as we've gone through the Lord's Sermon on the Mount, I'd like to begin our time with prayer together. If you would stand and we would pray as Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Be seated. Our text this morning starts, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." You know, as we begin our section of the Sermon on the Mount this morning, I think there's something important to point out, that with the gospel, we are free from condemnation and freed for sanctification. Let me say that again. We are free from condemnation and freed for sanctification. We don't have to worry. We don't have a God who's sitting who's like a little boy with a magnifying glass sitting on an anthill waiting to zap us. We have a God who's given us grace. We have a God who's given us love. There's nothing that he wouldn't do to bring us to himself, so much so that he was willing to give his only son. We have given a gift that we cannot earn, that frees us from any judgment. And so what Jesus says is, if we have been given that gift, if we have been freed from any judgment, what are you doing judging? What are you doing? You know, growing up, my older brother, he was hypercritical of everything I did. You hear that, kids? You need to be nice to your siblings, because one day they might grow up and be a preacher and tell on you, okay? So, well, I can joke about it now because he's grown a little bit, and I have too. We got a great relationship now. But everything I ever did when I was a kid, it was his job to correct me. If I said that the sky was blue, he'd say, "Well, actually, it's more of a robin's egg." You know, all of us know somebody like that. All of us know somebody who's appointed themselves the party police. They have this compulsion to correct people. We've got pet names for them. If it has to do with words, we call them grammar Nazis. It's not your, it's your. It's not there, it's there. We all have people in our lives like this who take it upon themselves to do the one correcting, who take it upon themselves to be the one judging. And you might, and if you're thinking this morning, no, we don't. I can't think of anybody in my life that's like that. It's you. And you're the one doing it to me right now. You know, I don't know about you, but I used to think God was like that. I used to think that he was the party police. That he was waiting for us to screw up, waiting to condemn us. And when we think that God is like that, we start to imitate that, don't we? If we think that we serve a God whose primary purpose is judgment, we feel free, we feel vindicated even when we start to look and judge and condemn others. But the gospel is that God is not like that. That God is ready to forgive. He's ready to give of himself rather than condemn us. What we believe about God changes how we treat people. Notice, it doesn't just stop with judge not. There's also a duty. There's also something given for us to do. God isn't quick to criticize. Our God is quick to reshape, to rebuild, to redeem, and rearrange you. It says, what are you doing worrying about the speck in your brother's eye when you've got a plank in your own eye? First, take out the plank in your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your other's. You know, instead of focusing on the drug addict down the street, why don't you focus on, I don't know, your relationships? Relationship with your wife or your marriage. Instead of world hunger, why not the hungry on our own streets? Instead of looking down on gossips, why don't we control our own tongues? Get your house in order before you criticize the world. Why do we do that? Why are we so focused on the brokenness outside of ourselves that we fail to address the brokenness inside of ourselves? I think partially it's because it's easier. We don't have to deal with ourselves. We don't have to deal with the messiness that God has put inside of us if we're so focused on the brokenness outside. The way I think about it is self-righteousness is a really good anesthetic. It numbs us to our own brokenness, to what God should be doing in our lives if we can externalize and put judgment on others. And so, if we allow ourselves to be so focused on the brokenness of others that we don't come to terms with our own brokenness, we don't come to terms with what God wants to sanctify us from, we're in trouble. And so many people do this. You know, you might, calling you out on how you're raising your kids keeps me from having to deal with my pornography addiction. Calling you out on how you spend your money makes me not have to deal with the substance abuse problem that I'm dealing with. We have these different outlets that we pour our efforts into instead of pouring them into ourselves. And Jesus tells us this morning that you need to work on yourself. Grace is free. The gospel is a free gift. There is no judgment, but we are freed from condemnation for sanctification. Verse 7, Jesus continues. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. And the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for some bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Now you might be saying, well, Brian, okay, you want me to focus on myself. You want me to stop judging others. You want me to be open to what God is trying to do in me. But Brian, the plank is in too deep. It's too painful to remove. It's too much for me to bear. This addiction is the only thing that's keeping me going. I've done too much damage to that relationship to salvage. I'm just a screw up and there's no helping me. If that's where you are, if you feel like you're too deep in, if you feel like your brokenness is too severe, these words are for you. Ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened. What Jesus is telling us this morning is that God is ready to bless you. He is ready and willing. If you knock, the door is opened. If you ask, you will receive. If you seek, you will find. But did you notice what there's a condition? He says, knock, and the door will be open. That means you've got to do something. The door isn't going to just open by itself. You've got to step out. You've got to say, all right, God, you promised me that you're gonna meet me where I go. I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to walk on this road, just as God called Abraham out of the land of his fathers to follow God to a place he did not know. He's asking you to step out from the life that you've held on to so long and follow him into something great. But the condition is you've got to step out. And you might be saying, well, I've been stepping out. I've been working real hard. I've been putting so much effort into what my life is doing. I've been burning the candle at both ends. Well, I've got to ask you, what door are you knocking on? Are you hustling, chasing that paper, or are you chasing God? Are you chasing after complacency, or are you knocking on the door of compassion? You see, one of the things that this should ask, this should prompt in us, is the question: are we knocking on the right doors? What is our life aiming at? Have we structured our life in a way that pursues the blessing of God rather than the appetites of our corrupt hearts? If your life seems like it won't turn around, really ask yourself, where am I aiming? What door am I knocking on? Verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also for them. For this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and there are few that find it. You see, Jesus is telling us that there is a way to live. There is a door to knock on. There is a way to search. There is something you should be asking for. There is a way of life that its trajectory is God. And he gives you a shorthand for it. Whatever you wish someone would do, do for them. And you say, well, that sounds easy. It's simple enough to understand. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Real simple. We put it on bumper stickers. We put it on T-shirts. We put it everywhere. Real simple to get. Then Jesus throws a curveball. He says, this is real simple, but guess what? Nobody's going to do it. Wide is the gate, and easy is the way that leads to destruction, and many enter it. But narrow and hard is the way that leads to life, and few will find it. You see, Jesus is telling us the truth this morning, that there is blessing and beauty ready for us. But Jesus also tells us what I know to be the truth, that most of us are pursuing complacency instead of compassion. Most of us are pursuing our appetites instead of God's menus. Most of us are doing for ourselves what we would have others do for us. I've been thinking a lot lately. My father's birthday is this month. He's a leap year baby. So he only has an actual birthday every 4 months. He's born on February, 4 years. He's born on February 29th. Oh, yeah. And I got to thinking a little bit because as I was poring over the scriptures, over my commentaries, over my sermon notes, got to thinking about my dad a little bit because he lost his father pretty young. My father's father was 55 when he died. And I got to thinking, and I realized I am the same age now that my father was when his father died. And I got to thinking about that. I thought, how would that feel for me if I lost my father today? And so I decided to call him. I called him. I said, Dad, I'm the same age you were when your dad died. And he said, I've actually been thinking about that. I said, what was that like? Because, I'd been thinking about how my life had changed. I've been thinking about from when I was in school, where I didn't have a worry in the world except my grades and making sure I had enough to live on. And then I got married, and things changed with that. I got jobs. I have a child. The levels of responsibility that have come on. And, I think back and I think, man, I really didn't have to do much at all when I was a kid. And now all this responsibility has piled on. And I think, would I go back? Would I want to go back where I had no responsibility? And the answer is no. What I've found is that as I've taken on more, as I have been faithful with what God has given me to do, I have found that my life is more meaningful. I found that having a child is a whole lot more responsibility than I thought it was going to be. But it's also a lot more meaningful than I thought it was going to be. And so I asked my dad, what was it like? What was it like to suddenly be the man of the family? He told me, well, it wasn't a huge surprise. He'd been struggling with his health for a little while. And when we took him to that hospital that final time, the last thing he said to me was, be sure and take care of your mom. And that responsibility that he took on, his world suddenly changed, meant something. He was there for something. God had something for him to do. His father had left him something for him to do, and he had a choice. He could either rise to the occasion or crumble. And so he rose. We all have something to do. We have all been given something by our Father. And the question is, will we rise to the occasion? You might say, well, what do I have to do? Well, one of the things you have to do is love your family. Raise them to be godly people. What do I have to do? Well, you need to provide. What do I have to do? Well, you say, well, I'm old. I've got no kids. I'm retired. My health is failing. What am I supposed to do? What am I here for? What responsibility do I have? One of the responsibilities that we have that we don't talk about very much is the responsibility to be faithful unto death. Because I'm not going to lie. If you don't show me how, I'm not going to know. Maybe that's your responsibility right now. God has given us something to do. God has given us a path to follow that is narrow and that is hard, and He's asked us to step up and rise to the occasion. God is leading us into unbelievable blessing. And the reason we miss it so often is because that blessing is in the shape of the cross. We have the blessing of enriching the lives of our children and society forever, but that's wrapped up in the responsibility to teach and care for children. Let's be honest, some of our kids are brats. They just are. Providing for those in need in the shape is a blessing that's in the shape of a job that we don't love. We push back into the brokenness of this world when we voluntarily embrace that brokenness, bear it, and follow Jesus up the road to Calvary. God has put blessings in front of us in the form of the responsibilities that he calls us into. And so Jesus unpacks that for us in verse 21. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name?' And then I will tell them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" And I've heard this passage taught as if you have to have the perfect right set of beliefs, or God's not going to accept your devotion, God's not going to accept your worship. And that's not at all what Jesus is talking about here. What Jesus is talking about, he says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter my Father's kingdom, but the one who" what? "Does the will of my Father." This is about saying and doing. This is about, are we going to actually rise to what God has called us to or not? The thing is, you might say, "Well, I don't really have a lot going on. I don't have much I can offer." And the beauty of what God has called us into is that the transformation that God is calling us into is not found, is actually found in the process itself, not in the destination. It doesn't matter if you can't make it there. God says, "I will pour my Spirit into you. You will be empowered. You will be lifted up." It's not about us. It's not about what we do. It's the fact that we journey with God together. Verse 24, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock." You guys remember that song? The wise man who built his house on the rock. "And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." You see, the difference between the house on the rock and the difference between the house on the sand is not that they didn't hear what Jesus said. It's not that they didn't understand what Jesus asked of them. The difference between the house on the rock and the house on the sand is the one on the rock heard and did, and the one on the sand heard. That's the difference. And so what Jesus is calling us into, he's given us a whole lot of message about his love, his unconditional love, his grace, the beauty of the gospel. And now he's telling us, what is our response to that? What is our response to that free gift? He wants us to know that it's free. He wants us to know it's something that we don't earn. There is no step that we can take to earn what God has done. But he also wants us to know that the grace he has given us is supposed to set us on a journey. It is for freedom that we have been set free. Jesus stands before his church, the freed, the redeemed, and beckons us. Pick up your cross and follow me. And now it's time to step up. Think about your own life. What are the ways that we are currently missing the mark? What are the ways that God has called us into faithfulness to be a blessing to our family, to the people around us, that we are letting that obligation slide? God says, pick it up and follow. Now is the time for us to step up. Now is the time for us to embrace responsibility. Now is the time for us to be who we were meant to be. Because the truth is, it is by picking up that responsibility that God empowers us and develops us and allows us to do the great things that he's called us to do. It's not by staying at home and living in mom's basement that we are called into greatness. It is by following God to where he leads us. It's time to stop dodging responsibility and taking the call of God as it was meant to be, as it is meant to be for each individual one of us. It's time for us to be who God knows that we can be rather than who we are now. Not by running from the responsibilities that God has put in front of us, but by rising to the occasion. I pray that we will. The world is depending on it. So this morning I want to close our time together with the Lord's Prayer again, with God's prayer, the prayer that Jesus taught us. If you want to stand with me. And as we do that, think about this not just as words that we say that we're repeating without thinking, but think about them and think about the responsibility that it calls us to. Let's go to God. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Be seated. If you have a need, this is the time. If you have something to bring before the congregation, whether it be something you need prayers for that you're struggling with, this or something that you want to give thanks for, this is the time. We are God's family, and we want to rise to the occasion. We want to rise to meet the needs that you have. If you have any, would you come now as we stand and as we sing?